You know, you sometimes see people who just seem to glide through life.
Mm-hmm.
They
Definitely.
get into the best schools, land the amazing jobs, seem to have all the access, and you kind of wonder, what's their secret? Is it really just about money?
Well, that's the core question Pierre Bourdieu tackles. And his answer is, no. It's not just money. There's a whole suite of other resources, often invisible ones.
Okay.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into Bourdieu, the French sociologist, trying to decode that hidden advantage. If you've ever felt that pure merit doesn't quite explain everything.
Which I think many of us have felt.
Right. Our mission is to unpack his theory of the four forms of capital: economic, cultural, social, and symbolic. We want to see how they actually grant, clout, access, and power in society.
It sounds like a kind of sociological decoder
And
ring,
that's a great way to put it, yeah.
helping us see why maybe connections or your background knowledge or even just how you carry yourself matters as much as what's in your bank account.
Mhm.
Especially, I guess, in competitive arenas like education or the job market.
Exactly. So let's start with the most obvious one, the first pillar, economic capital.
Okay, this one feels straightforward.
It is, mostly. It's your financial resources, your material assets.
Yeah.
So wealth, income, property, investments, stocks, that kind of thing.
The stuff you can easily count.
Precisely. And it's institutionalized, right? Through property rights.
Yeah.
Its main function is clear. You can convert it directly into money to buy advantages.
Like paying for elite schooling or getting seed money for a startup, it buys you a direct leg up.
A direct advantage in the game, yes. But, as you hinted, if success was purely about money, well, the kids of the super rich would always succeed, and we know it's more complicated.
Right. There are other factors. So what's the next layer? The more invisible stuff.
Okay, so next up is social capital. This isn't about what you own, but more about who you know.
Your network.
Your network, exactly. Bourdieu defines it as the resources someone gains through a, quote, durable network of more or less institutionalized relationships.
Durable and institutionalized. So it's not just casual acquaintances. It's solid connections.
Yes, and it's not just about having lots of contacts yourself. It's also about who your contacts know. People with high social capital often have contacts who are also well-connected, high up.
Ah, so it's like a multiplier effect. Exponential influence almost.
You could say that.
Mm-hmm.
The real benefit here is access. Maybe you have a friend or a parent's friend in a high position who can make an introduction to a potential employer.
Right, bypassing the standard application process.
Exactly. It gives you that quiet, critical leg up, especially in really competitive fields. It can open doors that, frankly, pure talent or qualifications alone might not.
Okay, so we have money and we have connections. What's next? You mentioned cultural capital. This one always felt a bit more slippery to me.
It is slippery, and often most surprising, partly because it's so deeply internalized. It's distinct from social capital. Well, if social capital helps open the door, you could say cultural capital is having the right key to fit the lock once you're inside. It refers to non-financial assets. Things like your knowledge, your skills, your education, even your tastes in art or music that signal your status.
So it's about what you know and how what you know aligns with what society, or at least the dominant groups in society, value.
Precisely. It's about possessing that internalized knowledge and, crucially, that feel for the game that matches the expectations of those in power.
Okay, that's 3. What's the final form?
The final one, kind of the pinnacle in some ways, is symbolic capital.
Symbolic. Meaning what exactly?
Prestige, recognition, social honor. It's the moment when your other forms of capital, your wealth, your connections, your cultural know-how are recognized and validated by the wider society.
Oh, okay.
And what's really fascinating is that it's often a transformation of one of the other forms.
So it's like capital that's been laundered or masked, so it's not perceived as such, as the source says.
That's a provocative way to put it. But yeah, in a sense, think about a Nobel Prize. Winning it signifies incredible intellectual achievement, right? That's cultural capital.
Definitely.
But the recognition itself, the prize, confers this immense prestige and global deference. That's symbolic capital. Your intellectual achievement is transformed into a powerful form of social honor. Your reputation basically becomes currency.
Wow. Okay, so these 4 forms, economic, social, cultural, symbolic, work together to shape someone's chances in life.
That's the core idea. But I think we really need to dig deeper into cultural capital because Bourdieu argues it's often the most complex and maybe insidious form.
Why insidious?
Because it's so often inherited or acquired very early, and it's constantly being judged, often unconsciously. It looks like natural talent or refinement, but it's usually trained. And Bourdieu actually breaks it down further into 3 distinct states.
All right, let's get into that. This feels like where the deep dive really starts. Where do we begin?
Let's start with the most elusive state, embodied cultural capital.
Embodied, like in your body.
Exactly. It's the knowledge, the skills, the ways of being that are deeply internalized in your mind and your body. It's acquired very early on, often unconsciously, through your upbringing and socialization.
So it's not just knowing facts, but how you operate.
Yes, it's very closely tied to what Bourdieu calls your habitus, that ingrained, practical sense, the feel for the game. It's not just having a physics degree. It's how you argue a point, your level of confidence, maybe your accent, the subtle signals of class and confidence.
Knowing which fork to use at a fancy dinner or how to hold a wine glass at a networking event, those small things.
Those are classic examples, yes. They seem trivial, but they signal belonging or not belonging. Another example Bourdieu used related to language.
Oh, right. The source mentioned the difference between an elaborated code and a restricted code of speech. Can you break that down for us? What does that mean practically?
Sure, it's a key point. Someone raised using what Basil Bernstein called an elaborated code, often middle or upper class, learns to use language that's, well, more formal, grammatically complex, less tied to immediate context. It's the language expected in academic settings, perfect for abstract thinking.
Okay. And the restricted code.
The restricted code, more common in working-class backgrounds, is often more context-dependent, relies on shared understandings within a community, maybe uses simpler sentence structures. It's perfectly functional and rich in its own context.
But it's not what the school system rewards.
Exactly. It's subtly, or not so subtly, devalued in formal educational or professional settings. So it's not about intelligence at all. It's a mismatch between the child's or person's homegrown habitus, their linguistic toolkit, and the expectations of the institution.
The school basically rewards the linguistic software that upper middle class kids often arrive with already installed.
That's a good analogy.
Precisely.
Okay, so that's embodied. The next state is objectified cultural capital.
Objectified. So objects, things.
Yes, physical objects that transmit or signify culture. Think rare books, classic literature collections, original artwork, maybe a high-quality musical instrument.
But just owning a shelf full of impressive-looking books doesn't automatically grant you cultural capital, does it? I mean, I could buy them.
Right, and that's the crucial caveat Bourdieu makes. These objects only really function as cultural capital if the owner also possesses the embodied cultural capital needed to use, understand, or appreciate them.
Ah, okay. So owning the grand piano is one thing.
But actually being able to play it well or discuss classical music knowledgeably, that's the embodied part that gives the object its capital value. Without the know-how, the expensive object is just expensive object, a possession, not capital in his sense.
Got it. That makes sense. So embodied is internal, objectified is external things. What's the third state?
The third state is institutionalized cultural capital. This is probably the most familiar to many of us.
Okay, like credentials.
Exactly. Academic credentials and qualifications. Your degrees, diplomas, certifications, the stuff officially recognized by institutions.
The formal stamp of approval.
Yes. And its key function is as a credential that signals competence, legitimacy, and readiness for certain kinds of jobs or social positions. It acts as a kind of guaranteed currency.
And this form is probably the most directly convertible into economic capital, right? A good degree helps you get a better paying job.
Generally, yes. It determines your eligibility, at least on paper, for higher level employment. And we see its power constantly in the job market.
For sure. The sources mention that unspoken advantage an Ivy League degree might give someone in an interview compared to someone with a state university degree, even if they're equally smart or capable.
Right. The prestige of the institution itself, the institutionalized capital, acts like a multiplier. It confers measurable capital beyond just the knowledge gained.
So when you put those three states together, embodied, objectified, institutionalized, you start to see how cultural capital works as a whole system.
And you see Bourdieu's bigger argument. This whole system of accumulating and transmitting these various capitals is the core mechanism for how social class gets reproduced, generation after generation.
It keeps the structure in place. It's an engine for social stasis, really. You mentioned the elite rubbing elbows.
Yes, they share their social networks, their cultural norms. They ensure their children inherit the right habitus, the right connections, the right credentials. It helps sustain their privileged position, often quietly, almost naturally, it seems.
And the education system plays a huge role in this, doesn't it?
Absolutely central. Bourdieu saw the education system as a key site for this reproduction. It presents itself as meritocratic, based purely on talent and effort. But in reality, success within the system is massively helped by already possessing the right kind of cultural capital. The elaborated language codes, the familiarity with academic culture, the right attitudes, and the system then legitimizes the winners, making their success seem purely like innate talent or individual merit.
So it takes inherited advantage and makes it look like earned ability. That's a powerful ideological trick.
It is. And this brings us to a really important related concept, symbolic violence.
Violence. That sounds strong.
It is strong, but it's usually subtle, not physical. It's the way institutions, like schools, impose the values and norms of the dominant culture. Things like valuing punctuality in a certain way, academic language, particular attitudes towards authority or learning.
Okay.
And by imposing these as the only legitimate standards, they implicitly devalue the cultural backgrounds and habitus of those who don't conform, often working class or minority students.
So those students might feel alienated or like they don't belong or even that they're failing.
Exactly. They feel out of place. Their own cultural knowledge, their way of being, their habitus isn't recognized or valued. This constant, subtle imposition of dominant values can make them feel like any difficulties are their own personal failing.
When in fact, it's a structural exclusion, just masked as an academic or personal shortcoming.
Precisely. And that's the symbolic violence, the imposition of meaning that advantages one group and disadvantages another, often without overt force, making the dominated accept their own domination.
Wow. So the big takeaway here for, say, someone graduating looking for a job.
The big takeaway is that success isn't just about your talent or how hard you work. Those matter. You need to be aware of these other forms of capital, that institutionalized cultural capital. The prestige of where you studied plays a role. Your social capital, who you know through internships, family committees, plays a role.
So you need to actively cultivate not just your skills, but also your cultural know-how and your network.
Yes. Being aware of the game allows you to navigate it more effectively, especially if you're aiming for upward mobility. You need to actively develop both cultural and social capital.
Okay, this framework of capital is powerful, but you mentioned earlier it fits into a broader conceptual toolkit Bourdieu developed, the conceptual trio.
Right. To really get the full picture, you need to understand three interconnected concepts: field, habitus, and doxa. We've touched on habitus already.
So let's start with field. What's that?
The field is essentially the social arena, the setting where the game is played. Bourdieu defined it as any historical, non-homogeneous social space where agents, people, or institutions struggle and maneuver.
Struggle for what?
They struggle for the specific types of capital that are considered valuable within that particular field. Think of the art world, the political arena, the academic world, the field of journalism. Each is a distinct field.
So the kind of capital that gets you ahead in, say, the field of finance, maybe economic capital and certain social connections, might be very different from the capital needed in the field of avant-garde poetry, which might prioritize a specific kind of cultural and symbolic capital.
Exactly. Each field has its own unique rules, its own hierarchy, its own forms of valued capital, and its own logic of practice.
Okay, so field is the arena. And habitus, we talked about it with embodied capital.
Right. Habitus is the set of deeply ingrained dispositions, skills, habits, and ways of seeing the world that we acquire through our upbringing and life experiences, especially our early ones. It's largely unconscious.
It's what gives you that practical sense or that feel for the game within a particular field.
Precisely. It shapes your perceptions, your tastes, your actions, making you feel at home in certain fields or social settings and out of place in others. It's why you might intuitively know how to behave at a formal academic conference, but feel awkward at a high-stakes poker game, or vice versa.
Okay, field is the game board. Habitus is the player's internalized strategy guide. What's the third piece, doxa? You said it's maybe the most powerful because it's invisible.
Yes, doxa. Doxa refers to the fundamental, deep-seated, unconscious beliefs and values that are taken for granted as self-evident universals within a specific field. It's the common sense of that field.
The stuff that goes without saying.
Exactly. It's what everyone in the field accepts as reality, the fundamental rules and assumptions that structure the entire game, but are rarely questioned or even noticed. In the field of education, for example, the widespread belief that the system is fundamentally meritocratic could be seen as doxa.
And the power of doxa is that if you do try to question it, you risk looking foolish or like you don't understand the basic rules.
Precisely. You're challenging what is considered natural or obvious reality within that specific social world. It maintains the existing power structures by making them seem natural and inevitable.
Okay, field, habitus, doxa. That really ties the whole theory together.
Yeah.
But like any major theory, Bourdieu's framework isn't without its critics, right? We should probably touch on those for a balanced view.
Absolutely.
Well,
It's crucial. One major critique often raised is the lack of empirical grounding for some concepts.
like habitus.
Exactly. Critics argue that something like habitus, this deeply ingrained, largely unconscious set of dispositions, is incredibly difficult, maybe impossible, to reliably measure or empirically prove or disprove using standard scientific methods. How do you quantify a feel for the game?
That seems like a fair challenge from a scientific perspective. What else?
Another common critique is that his view leads to an oversimplification of social reality. Well, Bourdieu often frames social life as primarily, almost exclusively, a competitive struggle for different forms of capital and status. Critics argue this overlooks or downplays other significant aspects of human existence, like altruism, ethics, genuine cooperation, love, morality, things not easily reducible to strategic positioning.
So it's too focused on the zero-sum game of power and distinction.
Some critics definitely feel that way, yeah. That it presents too cynical or deterministic a view of human motivation and social interaction.
And that ties into the third point, doesn't it? The neglect of individual agency. This one always bothers people. If habitus shapes us so much, where's free will?
That's a huge debate. The theory puts a lot of weight on social conditioning and the determining force of the habitus. Critics argue it doesn't leave enough room for conscious individual choice, reflection, or the possibility of people radically breaking from their social origins or challenging the structures.
Even though Bourdieu himself argued that agency, while constrained, still exists.
He did try to address that. Arguing habitus provides dispositions, not rigid directives. But the emphasis in much of his work is definitely on the constraining power of social structures and internalized norms, which leads some to feel it's overly deterministic.
Okay, one more critique mentioned in the sources.
Yes, the critique regarding incomplete consideration of variables. Meaning that while Bourdieu's analysis of class is incredibly powerful and insightful, critics argue it sometimes underemphasizes or doesn't fully integrate the intersecting dynamics of other major axes of inequality, like gender, race, and ethnicity.
So how does being a woman or being from a racial minority group interact with or change the way these forms of capital are acquired, valued, or deployed?
Exactly. While class is central, the experience of, say, symbolic violence or the conversion rates between different forms of capital might look very different depending on these other intersecting identities. Some argue his primary focus on class doesn't fully capture that complexity.
Right. So despite these valid critiques, the framework is still incredibly useful.
Oh, absolutely. It remains one of the most powerful tools we have for understanding how inequality persists and how seemingly neutral systems often work to reproduce existing hierarchies.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the big picture is that capital isn't just cash in the bank. It's this complex, multifaceted engine, economic, social, cultural, symbolic-y that drives social movement, but perhaps more often reinforces social stasis. It explains a lot about why hierarchies are so sticky.
Exactly. And the final thought I really want to leave you with, something Bourdieu emphasized, centers on this idea of distinction.
Distinction, how we differentiate ourselves.
Yes. He famously argued that taste classifies, and it classifies the classifier. What he meant is that our seemingly personal preferences in food, clothing, music, furniture, art, anything, are rarely just individual or innocent choices.
They're signals, they're performances of our social position, right?
Precisely. They signal our relationship to necessity and freedom. Do we have a taste of liberty, where we can afford to focus on form, style, and aesthetics over pure function? Or do we have a taste of necessity, where choices are driven primarily by function and cost?
We use taste to draw lines, to include and exclude.
We do. So the challenge I'd leave you with is this. Take a look at your own tastes, the things you consider naturally good or bad, your preferences in music or books, or even the way you speak in formal situations. Ask yourself, how much of this is truly my innate preference, and how much might be an unconscious performance, an invisible signal of my habitus, my place in the social hierarchy?
That's the unseen battlefield of cultural capital operating in our everyday choices.
That's it, exactly. Recognizing that is the first step to seeing the hidden mechanics of the social world.
A fascinating and somewhat unsettling thought to end on. Thank you for guiding us through this complex territory. It certainly gives us a lot to think about in terms of those hidden rules of success.
My pleasure. Until next time, keep exploring those structures.